Welcome everybody to our June version of Circle Online for the Church of the Sacred Circle. I am your hostess today, Reverend Heron, and a funny thing happened today. I was having a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do today, and got woken up this morning with this very intensely torrential hail. And as I was getting woken up, I started thinking of the word Hestia and how many people worldwide have basically been forced to stay in their homes. So we don't go out except for maybe to shop or do some essential things. Those of us who can work from home have been working, in our homes, and so our homes have become very important to us recently. And this is kind of exemplified by the fact that a lot of people are doing things with their homes because they're essentially forced to stay in. There's nowhere to go, there's no social activity outside the home, and so we've kind of been in this very sort of enforced hermitage. And as a result, I think that a lot of people have turned to kind of these very domestic pursuits. So you've seen a lot of people, baking bread, for instance, or starting, sourdough starters, and doing home improvements, for instance, doing cleaning or remodeling or doing projects that they haven't been able to get to because, sort of our very busy Western life has been going on. And so I just wanted to be sure that kind of mention this because Hestia is the goddess of the hearth and home. So when I woke up this morning and I was awakened, I had this word, I had Hestia, and really started thinking about this idea, this fact that, so many people in the world are just very kind of stuck in our homes, and some people feel stuck. But Hestia was the goddess of the hearth and the home, and she didn't really leave the house. She stayed home, she was domestic, she baked bread, and she cared for the home, and she cared for the temples. And in fact, every home in ancient Greece had a shrine to Hestia. She was the goddess of the hearth. So when they started a fire, they were invoking Hestia. And importantly, she was also, as the domestic goddess, the original domestic goddess, she was, responsible for ensuring the happiness of the home, and so they would pray to Hestia for the happiness. And she was also, first in everything. So when there was any offerings to be made, Hestia would be called upon first. When they shared a meal, for instance, she would be given the very first and the best pieces of the meal, and wine would be poured out for her. So she was, despite not having a very, large reputation like some of the other Greek goddesses, she was very, very central to life in all of Greece, in the homes. So, let's see, is that, how are we doing on a sound check? Can you guys hear me?
It's just your voice.
Just my voice? Do I need to turn up my voice?
No, you're fine.
Okay. All right. So, yeah. So Hestia, historically in mythology, she was the daughter of Kronos and Rhea. So these were the Titans, the very, very first, very primordial gods and goddesses of Greek mythology, and they came first. And in fact, Kronos, for instance, is the father of Zeus and Demeter and all these other gods. And then Rhea, of course, is the mother of the gods. So they're kind of the primordial mother and father of all beings and all the universe. And Hestia was actually their first daughter, their first child. So Kronos being time, Rhea being the mother of the gods, and she's also described as being the controller of the flow of things. So she's kind of like the flow of life, of energy, of things that, happen. And she was seen as the being who was in charge of all that. And then their very first child was Hestia. As modern people, we don't think about fire very often. When we interact with fire in sort of its primal state, it's very often, something like it's special. It's like camping, or lighting a candle, or maybe birthday candles or something like that. So we don't have sort of this day-to-day relationship with fire unless you start thinking about the things that are actually happening in our lives. A lot of people have, natural gas heating, and they have this constant little fire in their pilot light that makes it able, so we can just turn a knob and all of a sudden we have heat. Internal combustion engines, our cars have fire in them every day when we travel. We are traveling with fire. And so that, I think, is a really it's something that sort of gets lost in kind of this day-to-day life as a modern people. But we do depend on fire every day. And the ancients really, really, really depended on fire. They had a very intimate relationship with it. And of course, they couldn't have survived in many cases without fire. We cook with fire if you have a natural gas oven, for instance. But these are kind of very controlled versions of fire. And I would say that the modern hearth, in a sense, is our oven, our stove, because that's where we cook, where we get our sustenance every day. For those of you that are fortunate enough to have fireplaces in your house, we do turn it on, but we don't rely on it necessarily for heat every day and for cooking every day. So we have a really interesting relationship with fire, and sort of this primal relationship with it has been lost. But that primal relationship for the ancients was very, very present. It was every single day. If your fire went out in your house, you had to go get fire from somewhere. And indeed, in ancient Greece, a continuous fire would have been kept in many towns. So the center of the town would have been similar to a town hall, and you could receive fire at any time by going to this central fire that was always kept burning. And you can see this in later eras where you have the Vestal virgins in Rome. So Vesta was the Roman version of Hestia. And again, she was very similar. She was very, very domestic. She didn't really leave the house. There's not a lot of mythologies around Hestia or Vesta, except for the fact that they were the ones who literally kept the heart of the home running. So it was a very important role, but not a really, big or sexy one, right? So she kind of gets forgotten a little bit. But we don't understand as moderns how important she was to these individuals that, didn't have electricity. They didn't have these primal sources of fire that we have access to day to day. So this central hearth in Rome became the job of the Vestal virgins. So the Vestal virgins were a society of women who were pledged to Vesta, and that's all they did. They kept the fire. Interestingly, we can see kind of a version of this in Celtic mythology, where you have Brigid, who is the goddess of fire, and she would have been called on first when there were, when somebody was doing the fire. And then there was also a shrine to Brigid in Ireland, which kept a continuous fire burning. And interestingly, Vesta was so important to the Romans that although they started getting rid of all of their shrines to the different pagan gods kind of very early on in the early ADs, Vesta had a shrine to her up until, I believe, the year 394, which of course was the rise of Emperor Theodosius, who was the person who converted the Roman Empire to Christianity, and so by decree got rid of basically all remnants of sort of this pagan past. But she really stayed up until the end. And in Ireland, who of course was much slower to convert than the main areas of Rome and Europe, the fire that was dedicated to Brigid actually lasted even longer, so about 100 or so years longer than that. And then it got the bishops in Rome got wind of it and quickly put it to rest. But it was actually renewed in, I want to remember, I believe it was 1996. So a continuous fire has been burning for Brigid now since the mid-90s. So it's kind of an interesting idea, this sort of eternal fire. And we actually have versions of it, of course, when we have memorials. You know, we have eternal flame at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Is that right? Yes? I'm asking Reverend Bill, who's here with me. But this concept of the eternal flame is very sort of, very kind of ingrained in humanity, because fire became such an important way to keep the survival of the human race going. And so these ideas around Hestia and Vesta were very central to the way humanity evolved, despite the fact that they don't really have these very large stories attributed to them. It was kind of just every day it was accepted, just like we accept the fact that we have pilot lights in our homes, like we accept the fact that we have internal combustion engines. So we don't make a big deal about the fact that we have a pilot light in our home, because it's just accepted. So this service is basically a way for us to reconnect with this sacredness of our homes, the sacredness of fire, the cleansing that can happen. And, as Hestia was, really a domestic goddess, the original, again, domestic goddess, she was also associated with cleansing. And so when I woke up today with Hestia and kind of these thoughts in my brain, of course, the first thing I do is I start researching, because I want to present, her mythologies correctly and make sure that I understand what I'm passing on to you guys. And the first thing I did, of course, was Google her. And lo and behold, today, June 7th, is the Feast of Hestia. So it's very interesting that she came to me today to want to be honored. And so that's what we're doing. We're honoring Hestia. So not a lot of us have a means to have fire in our homes. People live in apartments and in homes that don't have a fireplace, and all these various places that we inhabit. We're not really set up to have sort of this type of untamed fire in our lives. And so I'm going to show you a way to do this safely and indoors. So if you haven't been introduced to this will be something new. So first we're going to start our fire for Hestia, and then we're going to make her an offering. So offerings were a big deal for her. As I said, she was always honored at the beginning and at the end of every meal, so that she could receive that sustenance as a goddess, and so that the food that they ingested could be blessed with her presence. And also I wanted to point out that during the Feast of Hestia, a lot of people got the days off. Millers and bakers particularly took the day off because it was sacred to her, and people would actually practice baking bread in their homes. And so I would encourage you, if you want to honor Vesta, you could do something very simple like bake bread. And a lot of people get kind of stuck with baking bread. It's kind of really simple and really difficult at the same time if we haven't done it. But there's a really easy way to bake bread. And some of them are things like doing a banana bread. So my son today, when we were talking about doing Hestia, has made a loaf of banana walnut bread. So this was freshly baked, came out of the oven not quite an hour ago. So that's going to be one of our offerings. And she was also offered, of course, the fruits. And then for, of course, the Greeks and the Romans, she was particularly fond of the burnt offerings, which of course means the animals. As a vegetarian, I don't do animals, but she was very fond of, offerings of meat. So if you choose to do that, that's perfectly okay. So fruits that are in season, meats, any kind of feast would be a great offering to her. I'm just going to look at my document for a second and make sure I'm covering all the things that I wrote down. One of the things that's really characteristic of Hestia is that she's considered to be the most good-natured of the gods. And that doesn't sound very important until you get into a living situation with other people. What happens? Well, you might argue about stuff. Just little things, maybe bickery, back and forth stuff. And you can imagine that maybe when that happened, people would be able to sit down and ask Hestia, for her good nature, to come forth and help them resolve disputes, for instance. Another thing that happened is that, okay, so in Rome, the feast would actually be a 7-day event. So it would start on the 7th of June, and it would go for 7 or 8 days, and they would clean the temples, and they would clean the hearths, and everybody would clean everything. And then anything that was generated through cleaning, like trash, for instance, would be disposed of in a river. So this would be probably the final day of her festival, was when everything was cleaned and all the debris had been removed. The debris would be then sort of symbolically cast into the river as the final cleansing. And obviously I don't recommend that you clean your home and put trash in the river. We don't want to do that. But if you can come up with, for instance, things that are harmful to the environment, maybe even just a pan of dust could be cast into the river, symbolically cleansing your home. So really good things to do in her honor are to clean your home, clean your hearth particularly, or your oven, or your stove, anywhere that there is fire. If you do have a fireplace, you can of course generate ash. If you can kindle a sacred fire to her and you can release it into the environment, that would be fine. And then you can also do things like spiritual cleansing. Even if you don't want to do any of these physical things, you can just, take a salt bath, for instance, and psychologically cleanse yourself, releasing everything down the drain. So symbolically putting it into the river. So we're going to do a couple of things. So first I'm going to show you how to do a sacred flame inside very safely. So this generates a smokeless flame. However, you do need to have an adequate place of ventilation. It does not generate anything harmful, but it does generate a little bit of, I guess off-gassing would be appropriate. It does not generate soot, so that's good. But I would recommend you open a door or a window when you're doing this, just to make sure you have adequate ventilation. So this technique starts with Epsom salt. So Epsom salt is something you can get almost anywhere, and I don't recommend trying this with any Epsom salt that has anything added to it. So for instance, a lot of Epsom salt will have like clay added to it or different fragrance added to it. So just look for just plain Epsom salt, magnesium sulfate, with nothing else. The second thing you're going to need is a safe place for it. So you can see here I actually have a slab of stone on my altar here to make sure that when it gets hot it doesn't translate down into anything. So things that would be appropriate for this would be, so for instance, like a marble cutting board, just something that's fireproof for your cauldron to sit on, to make sure that you're not setting off any fires by transmitting the heat through to something that's flammable. A cauldron is a pretty simple thing to get. You can get the classic pot belly cauldrons, but anything cast iron is going to be perfect for this. I do not recommend that you do ceramic because of the temperature differences. It could crack and break in the midst of doing fire. That's not good. We don't want that. So just something very, very simple like this very small Dutch oven is perfect. And you need to make sure that it has a lid so that you could put out the fire when it is appropriate to do so by simply smothering this. An important point is that if you have a fire that is being generated by alcohol and you feel like it's getting out of control, like the flame is too big, smothering the fire is the only safe way to put it out. You cannot put water on a fire like this. It will just spread the flame and it will be bad. So don't do that. So some appropriate fireproof surface, an appropriate fireproof container, and a lid to be able to snuff it out. Those are the things that you need before you can do this safely. So with the Epsom salt, you're just going to pour some into your cauldron. And this is going to depend on how much rubbing alcohol you have. So rubbing alcohol, of course, is your fuel for this fire. The Epsom salts are a way to distribute the alcohol so that it burns evenly. So that's why this is an important bit. So I'm just going to smush down any clumps of Epsom salts. Now, in the days of a pandemic, rubbing alcohol is hard to find. So you can probably do this with 100 proof Everclear. I have not tried it, so I don't know if it is an appropriate thing, so you're going to have to safely experiment and get back to me. I would imagine that it worked because it is a similar, for instance, when they do cocktails that they set on fire, that's one of the things that they use is the Everclear and very high proof alcohols. But yeah, rubbing alcohol can be really, really difficult to get. So we couldn't find any for today, so I just have a little bit left over. And I think that that's actually too much Epsom salt for this tiny bit of rubbing alcohol. So I'm just going to pour it here and ask one of my helpers to dump it out for me. Thank you. All right, so I have a very small layer of Epsom salts because I do not have very much rubbing alcohol to start with. That's right there. Yeah. Okay. So just 70% rubbing alcohol is fine. This is 91. Oh, wait. I should have measured first before I dumped, but so the Epsom salts and the rubbing alcohol have to be in balance. So you want the rubbing alcohol to just cover your Epsom salts. If you don't have a lot, you can do what I did and start with a little bit and see how much it covers. So I'm just going to add to this. So what you want is you want the rubbing alcohol to just be a light layer that's just barely over the top of the Epsom salts. And somebody out there is gasping at the idea of using the last of their disinfectant in ritual. All right, that's great. So you want all of the Epsom salts to be wet with the alcohol, and you don't want a big pool, a big pool of the alcohol in your Epsom salts. So just so I will, let's see, can I have your phone for a sec with the camera? I'm going to have my helper Bill here post a photo of what this looks like in the event, so, or in the chat for this, so you can see what it looks like. Thank you, Bill. Okay, and once this is completed, we are going to ask Hestia to be present. So, Goddess Hestia, sweet one of the hearth, we ask for your presence and your blessings for our rite today. We ask that you receive this offering of fire and food and wine, and bless us with the bliss and joy of our homes. Now you can see that's a really nice flame. Again, it's sootless. There's just a little bit of off-gassing from the burning of the alcohol. So it's a very nice way to honor Hestia. And now we will come and get our offering. So first we're going to offer the bread. Hestia always gets the first and best portions. So we'll get a really nice slice of bread here for her. Now, first doesn't mean the first thing I cut. It means the best. Oops, my leaves are a little off. So, I'm going to say she wants this lovely slice of banana bread. Just right there. And then, of course, we want to honor her with some of these beautiful seasonal fruits. Don't do what I just did and reach over the fire. It's not good. But we'll cut this lovely ripe peach in half and give her a portion of it, maybe. There we go. Some lovely peach slices, the blueberries. So yeah, we have been kind of forced as a society and as a world to reevaluate what it is to be in our homes. So I hope that this can help you not take your home for granted and to kind of re-examine the sacredness of your hearth, of your home, of your temples. I really thought that, of course, if Hestia is the goddess of domesticity, she must have a kitty cat. So we have her kitty cat wine. We give you this offering, Hestia, that you may receive it and bless our homes and our houses and our lives with domestic bliss. There's a Homeric hymn, well, there's a couple to Hestia that I'm going to read. And then I want to read a really quick home blessing. So first, Homeric hymn number 29 goes like this. Hestia, in the high dwellings of all, both deathless gods and men who walk on earth, you have gained an everlasting abode and highest honor. Glorious is your portion and your right, for without you, mortals hold no banquet, where one does not duly pour sweet wine in offering to Hestia, both first and last. So, giving thanks to Hestia, so you could do this just today in honor of her, or you could actually take a whole week and do it. So I found a really great article that has some ideas about what to do every day for her feast. So the first one is to clean your hearth. So whatever that looks like with your home. If you do have a fireplace, you can just sweep the dust out of it. If you have just a stove, you can clean your stove. But in both of these, as you clean, try to tune in to this idea of home as sanctuary, as our first temple, as the source of safety, for instance, and as a source for bliss. You know, we have many happy things happen in our home a lot of the time, and so we want to, you know, honor her by understanding the sacredness of our homes and our hearth. The second thing that you could do maybe the next day would be to cook something special for yourself or your family or just for her. And then as you sit down, give thanks to Hestia. Pour out some wine for her if you have it. Thank you for providing her with this food and the means to cook it. And make sure that you honor her before you eat and after. So before you eat, give her the wines, and then following, you would maybe just give thanks to her for allowing you to have this meal. The next day, you could spend that day tending to your altar. So if you have an altar in your home, you could clean it, you could shake it out, give it a refresh, dust everything on it, clean things, maybe put your crystals with water, maybe rearrange things or put new items on, maybe put fresh flowers on for her. If you have more than one shrine or altar, you could do that also. The next day you could tend to your home as a temple. So whatever you can do to make your home more sacred, put up sacred items, clean out the dust in areas that you might need, that might need cleaning. Go around your home, maybe even do a home cleansing, sprinkle some salt water around, walk around with incense, walk around with sage, any of these things that you can do to your home to help it make it feel more sacred and more at home for you. You could take time then to tend to your inner temple. So maybe devote a day to doing a little bit of meditation, do some yoga, do something that centers you in this area in your house. Maybe create a space, if not in front of your altar, if you don't have enough room. Maybe you could just create some space where you can sit down and meditate. You could then give your house a final cleanse as you come up to the last of the week. Spend some time, maybe vacuuming, or again, like I said, you could literally just sweep up a pan of dust. But on the last day, and that would be next Sunday, you could make sort of a spiritual cleansing of your whole life, and then take something that you can safely throw in a water source. So for instance, some dust, some leaves, or anything that may have blown in your house. You could do, for instance, some offerings of flowers or things like that. Anything that symbolically symbolizes for you this cleansing. And so if you wanted to take this week and have that be a good time to sort of refresh everything in your life, this would be a really good way to honor Hestia and Vesta and Vestalia, and to celebrate the role that our homes have in our lives. Get a broom. Push all the stale energy out of your house. And as this ending of the flame dies down, you'll be able to see sort of a formed crust over the top of your Epsom salts. Even if you can't see any flames, there could still be flame and heat there. So make sure that you put it out safely. And also, although I didn't mention this, when you do this, make sure that there's nothing over the top of it. So you're not doing it on a shelf or inside some kind of enclosure. Make sure it's a very large area that you have, and that there's nothing close enough to get burned by those flames. Curtains, hanging posters, don't do it up against a wall. Just make sure you have a wide open place to do it, because I don't want to hear about any of you burning down your houses because you're doing the festival of Vestia or offerings to Hestia. So that would be really bad. And then when you're done with your offerings, you can simply place them outside in a compost pile. You could offer them to a tree. You could offer, just You could actually save them and put your offerings in the river as long as they're able to decompose properly. So, yeah, that's all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed this trip to ancient Greece and Rome, and leave us any comments that you like, and we will be with you next month.